we're going to go through just a little bit of the basics. I'm interested to know if you guys can chat me, what your experience is, if you're a complete newbie or if you have a little experience already. Again, this is going to be a basin that you guys have here. If you've already been digitizing for a while, maybe it's not for you. However, you're still able to ask questions, and I will certainly answer any question that you guys have here. So just chat me in the chat box. So we are using Chroma Inspire, and Inspire is the basic digitizing software. The features are somewhat limited. However, we can do like any and all digitizing with this software. So we can manually digitize logos, we can auto digitize, we can even create applique or 3D puff designs as well. So we're able to do just about anything that we need to do here. The first thing that I want to go through is our main tools, which would be our stitch types. So we have 3 different stitch types with Chroma Inspire. I'm looking at the very left-hand side of my screen, and at the very bottom of all of the tools, we have our different stitch types. So we have the run stitch, which is just a simple single line of stitches of thread. We have our classic satin. This is going to work in a column type of style. So we can make stitches like that for lettering or smaller areas. And then we have our complex fill, and that's going to be for larger areas of coverage, and that will be a full fill in stitch. So with our different stitch types, you will see as you hover over any tool, it does have a shortcut. So if I'm on my computer, I can switch between tapping on the number 2 on my keyboard because I'm hovering over run stitch. I can tap on 9 to go to classic satin, or I can tap on 5. So you have a lot of shortcuts in the program, and as you become more advanced with the digitizing, you can really switch back and forth between tools in an easy way, just using your shortcut keys. So again, if I were to hover over any of the tools here, you'll see in parentheses that we have our shortcut. Okay, so another thing that is very important is we are going to need to select our input mode. So the input mode means the method of how you're inputting your curves when you're digitizing. So I'm going to explain how that works. I'm just going to open up a fresh page here. And when you go into tools, so very top of our screen, general options, you have quite a few different options here. So I'll point out a couple of the main things, like the environment. So I like to view things in inches, although the machine's going to be always in metric. But for me, I like to see the grid in an inch by inch block, and that way I can better visualize the size that I'm creating in. So you can set your units. You can set your default palette. If you're always going to use a specific thread type, you can set the palette to match, and that way it'll give you the correct color code. So we like Madeira, we keep it there. You can change the color theme. That just means mine's set to dark, so everything looks dark around my tools. And then of course the language if you need. I would encourage you to set your auto save just in case, your computer crashes. We definitely don't want to lose our work. So you can set that there. Auto save I do every 5 minutes. We're going to kind of move past a couple of these tabs. The grid is important, so I set my grid up to be 1 inch by 1 inch, and that means those dotted lines show me 1 square inch. So when we go to digitizing, digitizing is where we have our input mode. So the input modes are simple draw, Bezier, and freehand. And I would encourage you to use all three, see what you like best, and then set your default to one of the three. Now, my default is on simple draw, and I'll explain all three of them. But even if you have your default set to something, you can actually switch back and forth as you are digitizing. So simple draw means that when I'm trying to create a curve, I'm going to use my keyboard and I'm going to hold down Control, or if you are using a Mac, it would be Command. And so let's just use our run stitch. I'm clicking, I'm just making straight lines, and if I want it to curve, I'm going to hold down the Control key and I will be able to curve my lines. I can release the Control key and get straight points. And you can notice that the straight lines are separated by small squares, and the curved lines are separated by small circles. And we actually have the ability to change those as well. I will go over that. So that's simple draw. The other options are Bezier, which I can actually switch to Bezier by using a shortcut. If you look at the very bottom left of my screen, you will see that it says just underneath those color chips, it says input run, and then in parentheses, it says C close, enter or right click done, and then you have FSBA, and that's your modes. So when I'm inputting a run, I can tap on C and it will close off that shape. I can right click and it will end. I can click enter and it will end. And then when I tap on any of those letters, it will switch the mode. So with Bezier, the way that you're inputting your curves is you're going to, so I'm tapping on B, you're going to click and drag, and that's how you get curves. Okay, so click and drag, and I can switch back to simple draw, again, by using my shortcut keys. So S for simple draw, B for Bezier, and then our last mode is going to be the freehand. So with freehand, I'm gonna move these out of the way. I'm gonna tap on F, and I have a little pencil on my screen. And with the pencil, I can draw freely on the screen, and it will create my stitch path. So while you're digitizing, and these will work with your other stitch types as well, you are free to switch back and forth. I can do Bezier. If I need something to be a little bit more organically shaped, I can do freehand. Or if I just want more control, I can do the simple draw. Okay. So do we have any questions about our input modes? So feel free to chat. Let me know if you need more clarification on the input modes. So now that we kind of know what our stitch types are, what our input modes are, let's look at some of the other tools that we have. And the left-hand side is really going to be our digitizing tools. And the top of our screen is going to be more like alignment and placement tools. So the first thing that I want to go over is a really important tool that's going to help us is our artwork tool. I'm looking at the very left-hand side of my screen, and I have just halfway down the artwork tool. So if I click on the little arrow just below these artworks, I have all of my options here. And what we're using the artwork tool is to create easy, quick shapes to then digitize into stitches. So I can click on hexagon and I can make a hexagon shape. Now this is just an artwork, it's not actually stitches yet. So after I create my shape, I would then need to use the Auto Digitize tool to convert it into stitches. So I have the object selected, and then I can click on the Auto Digitize tool. It asks me, Auto Digitize, yes. And now we have stitches. So it's just a simple run stitch. Now, let's say I wanted a perfect circle of fill stitches. To make a perfect circle, we can hold down the Control key to keep the dimensions same height and width. And then if I go to my selection tool, so just switching back, I'm going to look at the very top right of my screen. And we see here that it says artwork, it says type, opacity, stroke width, stroke color, the dashes. So if I want the outside to be a dashed line. Now I want to actually fill it in. So I can click fill and now have a filled in red circle with a black border. That's the stroke color. So when I go to auto digitize this, then now I have a complex fill and I still have that black run stitch as the stroke color. So your artworks are going to be utilized in addition with your auto digitize tool to create shapes. You can also say use them as a guide and manually digitize over if you wanted to do that. But it's really easy to just create your shapes, fill it in or keep it hollow, and then click on your auto digitize tool. So we went over a couple of our we went over our stitch types, we went over our input modes. The artwork tool is very important. Just below the artwork, we do have the text tool and the monogram tool. We can talk about the text a little bit later. Now, when we are beginning a design, most often we're going to have a JPEG or a vector file that we're going to work off of. If you're just going to create a file just from scratch, then you just begin and you go for it and start your design. But most of the time we have an image already. So you have a couple of different ways to bring in your image. So we're going to work with a JPEG or a PNG. And the first way, you can go to File and you can import. So if you wanted to import an artwork or import a bitmap, you can do that. The difference between these is an artwork is going to be your vector files. You can actually see that here. It says all vector files, and it shows you all of the different formats that you can bring in. And the import bitmap is going to be your bitmap files, which include JPEG, PNG, TIFF, and so on. So you can see the differences there. And I can import a JPEG that way, or I can use my backdrop feature. The backdrop feature is on the left-hand side of our panel or our software screen. And I'm going just about halfway. It's above the artwork tool. We have the backdrop tool. So I'm going to select a backdrop, and I'll see all of my options here. And I'll select something, open it, and it will place on the screen. So from here, I can size it. So if I know I want this to be 3 inches by 3 inches, then I can size it accordingly. Now keep in mind, the actual image is larger than the logo. So about 5 inches, I believe that the logo is, and I'm just looking at my grid, it is about 3 inches wide. So I can place it there. You can hit apply. You can, in your upper right hand corner, change the size. So maybe I just need it to be actually 5 inches. That's a little bit closer to 3 inches wide. And as soon as you click on any of your tools here, you'll be able to see that this is going to be cemented to your screen. So now I can use this to trace over with my different stitch tools. So I would, for most of this, probably use a complex fill. You could create all of it in a complex fill. You could create maybe some outlines with your run stitch. It's really up to you to how you want to determine which area is what stitch type. Now, if I'm beginning this design, it's best to work from the bottom going up. So looking at, say, the yellow circle first and digitizing that, then going into the pink, the light blue, the dark blue, they can be together, and then your text. And so with our different stitch tools, I'm just going to begin digitizing. I'm still on simple draw, so I can either start just over in this upper right hand corner, or I could start down here. I'm doing the yellow. So when you're digitizing, much easier if you're really zoomed in. And since I am on simple draw, I'm going to hold down Control so that my short lines will end up having a bit of curve to them. When I get to the top of my screen here, I'm going to press space bar and I'll be able to pan. And so that way you can kind of pan on your screen. If, let's say, I accidentally click off, a simple backspace will bring you back to the last stitch point. So even if I were to kind of mess up a little bit like that, I'm always going to be able to edit afterwards. And we're going to talk about editing as soon as I get part of this shape done. The editing is very important. Now, when I come to the end of the yellow shape, I am going to overextend because there will be a little bit of like push-pull compensation. So, I want the yellow and the blue to really overlap, because if they don't overlap, if they're just meeting on screen, then the yellow is going to pull a bit away, the blue is going to pull a bit away, and then we'll have a gap. in our design. So the yellow, I'm going to layer that a little bit underneath the blue, and that way I'll have a nice stitch out. And when I get into this area, I could trace around the blue and kind of like cut that out, or I could go straight down. I'm just going to go straight down and finish off that yellow shape. And I'll worry about the blue piece later. That's going to layer on top, so that will be just fine. And then I can do a C and it closes it off. So I am on realistic view right now. You have at the very top of your screen a little cube icon, and you can toggle that on and off. So if we toggle it off to just stitch view, then I can better see how I need to edit. So editing, you're going to select your object, and then you have just below our select tool, you have the shape tool. When I click on the shape tool, and again, I could tap on F9 as my shortcut. Then we see all of my points. I have all of the blue dots. I have the pink lines. So all of the blue dots are the points where I clicked on the screen. Up here in the top left, I had clicked off, so I wanted to adjust that point. So I can just grab the point and I can drag it down. And then you can either press enter or right click and it will adjust. So out here, I see a little bit of another edit. I'm just going to pull it in slightly. So you can adjust all of your points and move them as needed. So the blue are your points. You can also grab your pink line. So that's your outline. So we're looking in the very middle of the screen now, and I can actually drag this line. So if you guys hopefully can see this, I'm just dragging this pink line a little bit further in because I don't quite need all of those complex fill stitches underneath that dark blue tree. So I just pulled it in a bit, and we can even go further as to pull this line up so that the top of the tree isn't complex fill over complex fill. What we can do is we can actually add a point. So I can right click and I can add an extra point, and that gives me more flexibility to adjust. So I could add 2 points, I could add 3 points. You can add or subtract however many you need. And so all I'm doing here is just kind of adding the points and bringing my line further in because I don't need all of the stitches to be underneath that blue tree. It's unnecessary. The yellow line that I keep moving around here is our angle line, and that's just showing us the direction of the stitches. So right now they're going to be stitching out kind of diagonally. If I move it to just a flat 0 degrees, then we will have them go left to right. And you can adjust this. There's only one to play with in a complex fill shape, but you can adjust that way. All right, so we have our editing shapes. Now let's talk about our satin Stitch tool. The classic satin here, it works like a column. So there's going to, it's going to go like either left or right or top to bottom. So we have a left or right, or we have a top to bottom. And the Satin Stitch tool, it is only used for smaller areas because the machine isn't going to jump from one needle point to another and have a stitch that is like an inch long. It's going to be, first of all, it's going to look like this on your screen. And there's not enough, like the thread on your actual garment. It's just going to be kind of hanging there. So the Satin Stitch tool is really just meant for smaller areas, smaller columns. And you can see that it automatically adjusted itself as I dragged it inwards. So you can't have something that's about an inch wide. It's just too far, and it will cause some issues on the machine. So anytime you see that, that's not going to be good. So for our object here, you know, I could make the tree in a satin stitch, or I could probably make just the small window of the house, but everything else would be a complex fill. So the Satin Stitch tool, we can use this. Let's make one of the trees. Now, it can be a little bit harder to use instead of a run or a complex fill. So the satin, we're going to do like a left to right motion to go from top to the bottom. Now with this curve at the top of the tree, we will kind of have to try and work our way around that. So if I go left to right, I kind of went at an angle. So that way you guys can see how I got that curve. And I'm just gonna stop here just so I can further explain. So this shape, if we look at it in 3D view, obviously it's not perfect because I do need to change the stitch angle. But again, so I started diagonally to get that curve instead of beginning, you know, I could begin up here actually and do sort of a come out kind of shape and then go down, held down control to make a curve, and then you have your top kind of curve that way. So this one actually looks much better. This one I would have to edit to get it a little bit better. And you can also change the points again. So, you know, going back to, if you create something, you can always go back and edit. You have a lot of editing capabilities. I can drag any of these points. You see that there's a Bezier on this one. I can adjust the curve, you know, move them out. I adjusted the angle line. So you have different options there. Now going back to this one, where I started at the top and just slowly made my way down. With the satin tool, you can also create curves just like you would with your other stitch types, and you're just holding control. So you see now those blue, my points are circles instead of squares. So I have squares at the top because I didn't curve it, and I have circles towards the bottom. So let's move back onto our tree. I'm actually going to do the whole thing now. So going just from the top, make like a real small top area. I am going to hold control because I do want it to curve a bit. So I'm holding down control, and then I can release control because I don't need this to curve. I can actually drag it all the way down to the bottom and then go back into holding down control to get this curved bottom of the tree. And we're going to get the whole thing in one curve, and we'll keep it straight. So I released the control key and we finish it off. Now, if you guys notice that these lines here, they curved inwards, and that's just because I have the two last points in this tree just before the stem are curves. And I actually don't want those to be curved. I want those to be straight. So if I right click on these points, I can change it to a line. So I right click and I'm going to select line. So I want you guys to watch. Oops. So I'm on this circle. I know it can be hard to see. Right click, line. And you see how it just straightened it out right away for me? So now if we look at the whole object here, let's just kind of take a look top to bottom. My lines look pretty good. Maybe I need to drag a little corner out further. I can do that. I can drag this out. All of my angled lines, the yellow ones, they look good. They look really good. And then down here, I come to a slant. So that's fine. But instead of having it go straight across and then really change drastically, I can kind of have it go a little bit slower. So left to right, and then here I want this to almost gently curve into that slant. So you can add more angle lines to get a curve. So I just added a couple, and the way I did that was right click, add angle lines. So when you right click, when you're editing, you can see that you have so many options here. You can, add or delete angle lines. You can add or delete points. You would have to click on a point to delete it. You can edit your entry and exit point. That's like your start stop. You can edit, let's say I just want to edit the outlines and I don't want to see all of those yellow lines. I can just click edit outlines. Now I have better visibility to edit everything. And again, let's say up here, let's say I want this top to actually be curved more. I can change it to a smooth, and let's get everything out of the way. Now it's a circle, right? So now I have the option to curve that. I'm going to zoom in again and kind of repeat that part. So at first it was a square because I began as just a straight point. If I right click, change it to smooth, then it changes to a circle and it gives me this bezier. I can further adjust the curvature of this line here. And I can do the same for the other one here. So I actually need it to be a little bit flatter, but because here, as these stitches go up, they're going to kind of push up and fill that in. I can always change it back. So here's my object, and so far have something going, I'm just giving you guys examples. So I'm not going to manually digitize the entire thing because I want to talk about some other tools. So when we create our shapes, we have a default setting and a default density. If we look at the complex fill first, you can see in the upper right hand corner, we have quite a few little tabs here. And we see we have fill type, we have pattern, the stitch length, the density. So the density is the distance in between each stitch. And a 0.4 is the default here. We can certainly lower it, although with a complex fill, I would not go too low because then it'll just be too thick. We can go higher. So if I go up to like a 1, that means there's 1 millimeter in between each stitch. It looks like that. And we're most likely not going to do that unless that's the vibe. But just to show you, lower the number, the tighter it looks, the higher the number, the more spaced out. So we have our complex fill shape. Let's look at the satin shape. So the satin is a default 0.5. And in this shape, I definitely want the stitches a little closer. So I could go down a bit, and now it's really filled in and full looking. So the smaller your objects are, you don't have to go so low because the actual thread has weight to it. So your actual thread, if you have a really small object, those threads are going to be so bunched up that it won't look very nice. So, you know, if you're on a really small scale, if this object was a little tiny tree, then I would actually raise the density because the stitches, once they go down, they're going to fill in, you know, just by the weight or the length, the width of the actual thread. So we have, other than the density and fill type, we have underlay, push, pull, comp, our commands tab. That would be where you find some of your trims. And then you have transform, and that's for sizing. If you know that this has to be a specific size, you can enter that in here. You can also flip things, so you can rotate. The commands would be, if you want to end the command and have a trim, you can do that there.